Perhaps no story has been given more international coverage, more controversial front pages, more dividing editorials and days of footage than the ongoing refugee crisis. But while images of dinghies floating perilously in high seas, packed with women and children in life jackets, have by now become familiar to most of us, the way in which these people's stories have been told has changed dramatically in the course of the last year. Consider how in January 2015, only a few publications dared to talk about the ticking refugee time bomb, as Canada's weekly Maclean's put it. The article's author, Michael Petru, argued that without Western intervention in the by then nearly 4-year-long Syrian war, chaos would soon spread out. The West's lack of action will come back to haunt it, he added. Petru was, for better or worse, sending out a warning. Refugees are coming. A month later, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees PR chief, Melissa Fleming, is given a comment piece in The Guardian explaining why the situation in Syria was only going to get worse. Her words hope to speak to the humanitarian in all of us. She talked about schoolless children, stating that more than 50% of Syrian refugee children are out of school, as a quarter of Syria's schools have been damaged, destroyed, or taken over for shelter. She talked of widowed women, as almost 150,000 Syrian women in exile today had their households alone, describing how many of their men are dead or missing or otherwise lost to serious conflict. She talked of death tolls and a generation where thousands of children are being denied the nationality. Indeed, by February 2015, conservative broadsheets got on the offensive, with the Telegraph's Ruth Sherlock anxiously retelling how the Islamic State planned a takeover of Libya as a gateway to wage war across Europe. According to plans seen by the British anti-extremist group Kilium, she documented how the jihadists hope to flood the North African state with militiamen from Syria and Iraq, who will then sail across the Mediterranean, posing as migrants on people-trafficking vessels. In her piece, Sherlock weaved a series of stats about refugees landing on the Italian island of Lampedusa. And it was Lampedusa which captured European and American journalists' attention in April 2015, after boat transporting hundreds of refugees capsized and around 400 people drowned, reported here by the BBC and the New York Times. As thousands more were reportedly rescued weekly by the Italian Coast Guard, the situation was called the Sicilian Chaos by Austrian daily Der Standard. By this time, the term flood of migrants seemed to have firmly taken place in English-language papers. USA Today, one example. In the same month, German tabloid Bild put out a piece entitled The Dishonest Deal with Asylum Seekers, printed in response to an arson attack on a housing complex for refugees. In Britain, The Sun's violent pundit Katie Hopkins called for the struggling migrants to be gunned down rather than rescued, claiming, "No, I don't care. Show me pictures of coffins, show me bodies floating in water, play violins, and show me skinny people looking sad. I still don't care." She goes on, "Make no mistake, these migrants are like cockroaches." And as social media burst into inflamed debate, the topic of the refugee crisis was now finally in the public eye. For the most part of 2015, mainstream media coverage of the refugee crisis rang of fear-mongering and xenophobia. None did this style better than the British tabloids, who quickly caught up with the fact that the people landing in Lesbos and Chios were walking up the Balkans, through Austria and Germany, ending up on France's northern coast, in reach of England's shores. While other years would have offered a news-quiet summer, July 2015 was all about the floods of refugees getting to the port of Calais. The Daily Star declared that the migrant mobs had taken to the Channel Tunnel. The BBC reported lorries queuing up on the highways as men and women climbed into the backs, ruining the holidays of oh so many hard-working Brits. The Daily Mail went as far as issuing a front page with the headline, "The Swarm on Our Streets." And even Prime Minister David Cameron declared the UK not a safe haven for the swarm of people coming across the Mediterranean. As the summer drew to a close, the media had a field day on Europe's most powerful governments bickering over who is paying the most to help the never-ending arrival of refugees. But everything quickly changed when on the 2nd of September, the lifeless body of a 3-year-old boy was photographed on a beach in Turkey. The picture and his name, Alan Kurdi, became immediate global news. The Sun newspaper, in a complete U-turn from its Katie Hopkins piece, saw fit to call on the Prime Minister to do his duty, declaring, "Mr. Cameron, summer is over. Now deal with the biggest crisis facing Europe since World War II." Angela Merkel responded to the crisis with an open-door policy, welcoming all Syrian asylum seekers to remain in Germany. suspending the Dublin regulation, which forces refugees to seek asylum in the first European country in which they set foot, as The Independent reported. The Economist called her Merkel the Bold, declaring that the Chancellor is brave, decisive, and right. Yet, not long after, an opinion piece by James Forsyth in The Spectator claimed that Merkel's grandstanding will cause many more deaths at sea, saying that of all irresponsible decisions taken in recent years by European politicians, few will cause as much human misery. To save lives, Europe needs to stop people from thinking that if they take the risk of trying to cross into the European Union, then they will be able to claim asylum. How should we stop refugees from coming to Britain? By turning around the boats that attempt the journey, he quipped somewhat prophetically of what was to become EU policy in 2016. But the open door policy was soon to close. Less than 2 weeks after declaring "open the gates," the German head of state abruptly reinstated border controls. Why has Germany changed its mind? Asked the BBC in a piece straightforwardly entitled "Mixed Messages from Merkel." US-based media was perhaps better at deciphering the charade. In a CBS piece, "Dead Villain to Migrant Heroine," it said that a hallmark of Merkel's policy has always been pragmatism, rather than pathos or vision. Bloomberg declared how Merkel went from Greek crisis pariah to refugee crisis hero. And if we learned anything from this zigzagging policy period, is that Angela Merkel can play the game better than a lot of Western media, with an ear for popular moods far more tuned than some of the world's most famous tabloids. Towards the end of 2015, the debate over compassion versus common sense continued across the press. The Economist's September 2015 edition was dedicated to refugees, in a biblically designed font entitled "Exodus." Time magazine followed a similar path. "Welcome to Europe," a cover by photojournalist Yuri Kozyrev depicting a lone dinghy filled with families floating in a pitch-black sea. The striking images show the group being rescued through the night by a Greek Coast Guard vessel. The Exodus is both appealing to the liberal reader, potentially suffering from some kind of white savior complex, and alarming to the bigot, once again confronted with the sheer number of non-white people crossing borders into the West. But the lens through which the refugee crisis was seen became all the more blurred when in November a series of terrorist attacks in Paris killed 130 people. And it didn't take long for the media to question a connection between the perpetrators and Syrian refugees coming into Europe, such as these articles by The Washington Post and CNN and Germany's Weekly Stern. Reuters advanced that the holder of a Syrian passport found near one of the attackers had recently crossed the border in Greece. A Greek police source said the passport's owner was a young man who had arrived in Leros on a small vessel from Turkey with a group of 69 refugees and had his fingerprints taken by Greek officials. So whilst Vice firmly stated that scapegoating refugees from the Paris attacks is for idiots, the seed of doubt had been planted. Reported sex assaults across some of Germany's largest cities during New Year's Eve celebrations give the right-wing press further strength, calling for borders to be reinstated and refugees and migrants alike to be packed up and sent back home. Migrants planned sex attacks, reported The Times. The German Federal Justice Minister said the police had evidence the attacks were organized on social media, mobilizing young North African men from France and Belgium to travel to the western German city of Cologne. The Italian La Repubblica interviewed right-wing German historian Michael Stromer, who argued the attacks had been inevitable as Merkel made mistakes over migrants. And this is the mood we entered 2016 in. Fear-mongering and xenophobia seemed to remain. In February this year, right-wing Polish magazine Vichichi featured on its cover a woman, draped in the European Union flag, being grabbed by several male hands, all suspiciously dark against her ivory skin. The title ran "Islamic Rape of Europe," as the Daily Mirror reported. Britain's Prime Minister was at it again too, this time calling the by now over 7,000 people camped in Calais and Dunkirk a bunch of migrants, and those people in Calais, as The Independent reported. This March, a deal between the Brussels and Ankara governments meant thousands of people would be shipped from Greece back to Turkey, as seen in The Guardian. Turkey, in exchange for taking in refugees, can expect re-energized talks on its EU membership, €6 billion in EU aid over 3 years, plus visa-free travel in Europe for Turkish citizens, as the Wall Street Journal reports. Oldetonian Hugo Dixon blogs for Reuters that the plan offers a lot to the European economies, detailing how it would help keep Britain in the EU and Greece in the euro, shore up support for Angela Merkel, and avoid the collapse of the Schengen area. On the refugees' interests, however, not a word in the piece. The Telegraph offers an attempt at sympathy, saying that the EU's deal with Turkey is harsh on migrants, but the alternative is travel chaos. Not much later, the Wall Street Journal reported that the EU deal with Turkey is showing results, with the number of migrants dropping from nearly 27,000 to just 6,000 3 weeks after the deal was in place. And despite the change in numbers, the refugee crisis still rages on, and a viable solution to the thousands fleeing to Europe is still yet to be found. One thing that is certain, over the last 12 months, mainstream media and punditry across the world changed their headlines in accordance with popular feeling. But whenever in doubt, the vilification of refugees seems to still be the rule of thumb. It remains to be seen whether a new change of heart is ahead, and whether, for it to be the case, another toddler needs to die on the global stage.